we have Stephen Wagner now to kind of break down more of that. The perks of live on-air stuff in the morning. Stephen, thanks for the time. How are things over there in Coral Gables as Miami looks to bounce back this week?
Vibes are definitely, I would say, better than they've been in years past. Normally, I think that there's usually kind of a little bit of panic of, oh, this is the Mario Cristobal law. It's kind of consistent. This is kind of how, Miami and Mario Cristobal lose games. And this is even how Cristobal lost some games at Oregon. But I really think that there's a little bit more confidence that with this roster and this team and the way that this team has been built, that they will find a way to kind of get their groove back and get their rhythm back this week against Stanford. It's certainly a game that Miami should win and should win pretty handily. Miami built this team from front to back. They built it on offensive line, defensive line, and sure tackling. All of those are things that they hope are going to be able to travel from week to week. For whatever reason, the offensive line and the run game simply did not get going last week against Louisville. But I still think that there's quite a bit of optimism that, this team is going to be okay. You look at the rest of the schedule for Miami. Certainly, Miami should be favored in every game that they're going to play the remainder of the year. And, that includes your Mustangs.
That's right. Hopefully, we'll get to see some of your crew out here in Dallas as they'll make the trip. I'm sure Miami fans, look, one loss, hopefully that doesn't deter you like it did deter some Florida State fans. I know Miami fans, I feel like, will fit right in Dallas over here November 1st, and that'll be quite the party. Two programs that are very similar as far as the type of schools they are. Some of the football tradition, Miami's got a little bit more recent football tradition as of late, and of course being in the big city. Let's bring everybody together. Let's make this, the next time they look at the permanent rivals, let's make this a permanent rivalry, Dallas to Miami. So Miami does get, back into the action with Carson Beck coming off of 4 interceptions. I mean, some of them were kind of inexplicable. I know there's been a lot made about the last one where I could see, what maybe Carson was talking about. It looked like a wheel route that should have been a flat route as far as how it was thrown. But Carson Beck had his worst outing as a Cane and really, throughout his college career, you could argue. What is his mindset? What is kind of the early sense of how he took the loss and how he can try to right this ship?
Yeah, Carson definitely took a pretty decent amount of flack this week, especially for his response, which you just referenced. A lot of people interpreted that as, he took Elijah Lofton, the tight end that he was supposed to threw the ball to, and he pretty much threw him on the bus. And for a lot of people, this brought back up the concerns of, this is what we were talking about at Georgia, whenever we were mentioning, leadership issues and how people can rally around you in the locker room. How's this being a good teammate if you just, threw someone under the bus? But I think there's still a lot of optimism that things are going to kind of get right this week. I kind of view Stanford as a little bit of a get right game for Miami. Team from the West Coast traveling all the way to South Florida. We've seen over the last year, both in the Big Ten and in the ACC, that traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast and from the East Coast to the West Coast, that definitely has a little bit of effect on teams and the way they're able to perform. At the end of the day, these are college kids who have classes on Thursdays and Friday. But I do think that Beck is probably going to have a good response, but kind of the question that I think a lot of Miami fans are asking right now is, man, are we going to get the 2023 Carson Beck that we saw at Georgia, who was really freaking good, took Georgia to the SEC championship game where they lost to Alabama, had, I think, like a 13-1 season is what that ended up being, and, beat the brakes off of FSU in the Orange Bowl? Or is this going to be like 2024 Carson Beck, who was projected to be a first-round draft pick, and then things just went sideways, and it seemed like he was never really able to find a rhythm? The first half of the season, we absolutely saw 2023 Carson Beck. It seemed like, the change of scenery, the change of environment, the new players, the new system around him, it seemed like that really kind of rejuvenated him. Now I think this is going to be a game where we get quite a few questions answered as far as the type of Carson Beck that we're going to see, because certainly the Louisville game was not his best outing by far.
Yeah, and for Miami, I mean, I've been kind of disappointed with the run game. I just think with the talent on the offensive line and what they have there, it was kind of an issue last year a little bit at times, but it's really kind of reared its ugly head, I think, this year for Miami. Are there any conversations internally about how to get this offensive line rolling, some confidence, giving them more onus on the run game there?
Yeah, well, Mario Cristobal, there is always going to be a very, very heavy emphasis on the running game. I mean, what Mario Cristobal wants to do, at his heart, is he wants to just dominate you up front. He wants to understand, or he wants you to understand that it doesn't matter how many defenders you put in the box. It doesn't matter how you're going to line up. It doesn't matter, what you are going to do defensively. Mario Cristobal wants to send a message and punish you and just push forward with the offensive line. So far this year, I wouldn't actually say that the run game had been an issue. It really only showed up in the Louisville game. I think at one point they had 22 carries for 46 yards. The final stat line escapes me, but that was definitely a really, really strong issue and kind of a concern, considering that it's not something that we'd seen, at really any point this year. Normally, the offensive line is able to effectively, do whatever it needs to do. And this was a line that, at the start of the year, it really did look like the best offensive line in football. I thought there was a very, very good argument this was the best O-line. And they've invested a lot of time and a lot of resources and a lot of recruiting, and they've used the portal very, very smartly to supplement this offensive line. So I think this week, it's going to be a question of, well, okay, do we correct whatever it was last week? Because quite frankly, I have no idea what it was last week that just reared its ugly head. Because, like I said, offensive line is kind of one of those things that you expect to travel. You expect your offensive line, which is built on strength and physicality, you expect that strength and physicality to go up every week. It's not like, we're leaning on timing and we're leaning on finesse and we're leaving and we're leaning on communication. This is supposed to be strength and technique on strength and technique. And for whatever reason, it just did not show up last week at all. I do think that they should be able to run the ball pretty effectively against Stanford. I do think that there is a little bit of stubbornness from Miami in kind of the way that they want to do things. Miami wants to win kind of by punching you up front in the run game. A gap, B gap runs, maybe a little C gap here and there, but you'll notice they don't really run to the perimeter very often. And it kind of felt like Louisville was pretty much saying, okay, keep trying to beat us up front. We are just going to overly commit resources to trying to stop you up front. And, maybe it was a preparation thing. Maybe it was, maybe it really was as simple as, Miami wasn't ready for the game. Maybe honestly, man, this really is kind of one of those games that sort of escaped me whenever you're trying to look at, well, what exactly happened? What was the reason for this? Yes, Carson Beck threw 4 picks, but why is that? Because Miami absolutely had a superior roster. They absolutely had an offensive line that should have been able to handle a Louisville defensive line that I think is good, but I wouldn't say it's the best defensive front that Miami's faced this year, considering that they've already played Notre Dame and Florida and really ran the ball very effectively against both of those teams. So, if you want to scratch it up as, kind of a weird, inexplicable loss that it seems like, kind of always seems to creep up on Miami. I mean, in 2023, it was the Georgia Tech game where, very famously, Miami didn't take a knee at the end of the game. That was kind of the inexplicable loss. Last season, it was probably the Syracuse game where they had a 21-point lead on the road, final game of the season. It ended up blowing that lead. Maybe this year it's going to be the Louisville game where we look back a year from now and say, yeah, Carson Beck threw 4 picks. But I think the really, really important thing now is Miami making sure that this thing doesn't spiral.
The margin for error is so slim in this massive conference and the way the schedules have played out for Virginia, for Georgia Tech. Obviously, Miami will get their shot against SMU next week. They get Stanford this weekend, getting a chance to face a team that really hasn't shown too much. They've got a long road trip ahead of them as well to get out to Coral Gables. What does Miami have to do to make it to the ACC championship? Is it as simple as just stay focused? Is it certain things that they can improve fundamentally right now to kind of put them back in that driver's seat, as long as they play their game that they had been playing earlier this year?
I think part of it is a little bit of a focus thing, because if you look at what's happened in Miami the last 2 years, there's always been one loss that's kind of caused things to spiral a little bit. A couple of years ago, it was Georgia Tech and failing to take a knee. I think they were 4-0 or 5-0 at that point, and then the wheels kind of came off and they finished the year 7-6. Last year, it also happened to be at Georgia Tech, where Miami's defense did not play very well at all. Georgia Tech did a lot of things to kind of control the ball and give Miami fits and keep the ball out of Cam Ward's hands, and they ended up losing. Now that I think about it, they ended up losing 3 out of their last 4 because they lost the bowl game as well. They lost to Georgia Tech, then they lost to Syracuse, and then they ended up losing to Iowa State. This year, there's absolutely a possibility that Miami could end up losing. Could end up going on a little bit of a stretch where they lose 2 out of 3 games. It's absolutely possible that Miami loses to Louisville, they beat Stanford, and then they lose to SMU in Dallas. That's absolutely a thing that's very definitely on the table. So for Miami, it's about making sure that this thing does not spiral. And quite frankly, I think that this is going to be kind of one of those moments where leadership really needs to step up. Where leadership, makes sure that the players understand, hey, we can, that the world isn't over, but we have to stay focused. We cannot let this thing spiral. And what specifically that looks like, I'm really not sure, because some of these Miami teams, heck, even some of Cristobal Oregon teams. I mean, you remember that 2021 team that went to Columbus and beat Ohio State at the start of the year. By the end of the year, they were playing very, very tight. It looked like they weren't playing fast or having fun or just kind of being football players. It looked like they were playing more not to lose as opposed to playing to win. I think there's definitely got to be a little bit of concern from a fan standpoint that could happen this year. So I think for Miami, this is kind of one of those moments where leadership is probably going to be one of those things that you really need to lean on. And from a player standpoint, it's probably going to be one of those things that you need to lean on. Keep your players fresh, keep your players loose, and remind them that, hey, at the end of the day, football's fun. Go out there and play fun. Be fast, be physical. Understand that you're going to make mistakes. There's going to be mistakes in a football game, but as long as we play better than they do, you'll be pretty optimistic in how the game's going to turn out.
Yeah, I think for me, watch that point you made about the kind of the having fun angle. Sometimes some of these teams with the expectations placed on them with NIL and rev share and all of these things, man, they kind of forget that they are still playing in college. That, and I know now in college, there's class, there's this, there's that, there's money, there's all of these things floating around, and you do have other focuses outside of football, so it is hard to stay focused. But college football is a blast, man. The scene down at Hard Rock Stadium this year for so many of these games have just been awesome. And it's a shame that Friday night they couldn't put it together and kind of keep things rolling. I think it's good for the ACC that Miami would have stayed undefeated. It would have given them a team right at the 1 or 2 spot, and you could kind of ride that all the way to the end. A lot of people thought it was going to be Clemson this year, and Miami was going to be in that mix, but for Miami, to lose. Maybe this is that galvanizing moment, but they need to just kind of have fun. It just seems like a team that, like you said, could end up being tight. But if they do kind of find that fun again and get right this weekend against Stanford, that'll kind of potentially catapult them. They'll face a big test against SMU on the road November 1st, of course. So that'll be a big one. They'll have to stay focused against Stanford, though. Let's leave you with this. Who are your current ACC championship projected participants? Do you see Georgia Tech and the Hoos, just kind of riding out the nice schedule that they have and ending up there, or does SMU stay unbeaten? Do they find a way against Miami next week and keep things rolling? What's kind of your take on the whole scene?
I still think Miami is going to end up getting to the ACC championship game just because whenever you look at how Miami is built, this is the most talented roster in the ACC. Now, of course, that doesn't always beautifully translate to wins on the field. We've seen over and over and over again in college football, just because you have a loaded roster does not mean that you are going to win football games. But I still do believe that this is going to be kind of Miami's breakthrough season where they get to the ACC championship game and they get to the college football playoff. As for who they're going to face, man, I got to tell you, I'm a believer in Georgia Tech. I'm a real believer in what Brent Key has going over there. I think they are a really good football team. I think they are consistently finding ways to win. And more importantly, I think they're giant killers. And I think that if they ended up getting to the ACC championship game and they play a team like Miami, where say they're going to be underdogs, I definitely think that they're going to have a really real chance to absolutely slay the dragon. I think that SMU is absolutely going to have a good chance. I'm not a huge believer in Virginia. I think that they're going to have a slip up at some point. I kind of felt like, at the start of the year, whenever Virginia lost to NC State, that was kind of more of along the lines of the Virginia that I was sort of expecting to see. Obviously, they're playing really good football right now, but I think they're going to have to slip up at some point. But as far as, what I'm projecting, Miami playing Georgia Tech in the ACC championship game. I mean, heck, if SMU beats Miami in Dallas, that could just as easily be the Mustangs. So I think that is going to shape up to be a massive game with some really, really big implications for the conference, and obviously to get to the playoff too, because both teams are going to be searching for that automatic berth. Especially if that loss or one loss or two losses end up causing Miami to be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, it is going to be fascinating to watch this play out. We just hope that we don't have to get down to the coin toss for this one. That would be so brutal for the league, but it's going to be really interesting to follow. I think there's a path, obviously, to getting two teams into the college football playoff, which is probably the most important thing. It could involve Miami losing to SMU in a couple weeks and kind of falling out of the championship picture, and Miami, not making the college football playoff, and then it's SMU and maybe a Georgia Tech. But however it happens, they've got to get two in, just like last year, and then kind of all will be right in the world. But Miami is going to have something to say about it. I would probably say that Miami finds a way in. I still think they're a team that's really, really talented. I am not ready to give up on them just yet. I think for me, the talent level that they have in the defensive line and the wide receiver position is just a problem for teams down the stretch. But SMU is going to have a big say in that in 2 weeks, though. If Miami comes out and loses that one, that is going to be curtains for their ACC championship hopes. And SMU is kind of in an interesting spot right now. We learned a lot this weekend against Clemson and how they played that game overall, but still quite the task to take down Miami when they're at their best. So we'll see what happens when those two teams face off and how their rest of their seasons go. Stephen Wagner of On3, canesport.com. Thanks so much for stopping by this morning. I do want to remind you guys about our friends at OPW Solutions. OPW Solutions would love for you guys to reach out to them, and they can show you the work that they can do for your business. They're a full service commercial exterior maintenance company. They service North Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and they're expanding to new locations in 2026. They can do your commercial landscaping, power washing, snow and ice control, They also can paint your parking lot or put up Christmas lights for your business, fence maintenance, and much more. So make sure you give them a call, 214 444 2305. Sorry. Didn't want to give you the wrong number. 214 444 2305, or email them info@opwsolutions.com, or go to opwsolutions.com. Again, full service maintenance company there for your business, doing great work. And you can follow them on their socials as well to make sure that you get the full story from them on how they approach every single piece of their business and your business and servicing that. So we appreciate OPW Solutions for helping us out.